Welcome to On the Couch with Tim. Today we're going to be talking about the Black church, the LGBTQ community, and how those two worlds intersect. Today I have a guest, Marlon Young. He's going to be sitting in with me. I finally get him in the hot seat. Marlon, how you doing, man?
Pretty good, man.
Pretty well? Okay, we're going to see. Now that I got you in the red, how you really doing?
I tell you.
Okay.
Give it to you and stuff.
Well, man, if it's possible, let's start kind of at the beginning for you. What was church like for you growing up?
Long. I grew up in a home church, father's church, and then my mother got married to him, so we went to the home church in Piperton. Very family oriented, smaller church. Probably about 4 last names at the most in the church. So everybody knew everybody was family. And it was church, man. It was Sunday school. After Sunday school, you had that little break. Maybe got you a donut. Then you went to the church service. So you had the first service. That started at 11, lasted till 1. Then they had a service at 2:30 to 4. You know, it was an all-day thing. So that's what I grew up doing. And it was just always a part of my life. And I was able to get out of Tuesday night Bible study, but Sunday school and regular church, no, I had to do that on Sundays. So Sundays was church, food, and a little bit of rest. That was Sunday for us.
Okay, so just for clarity, did I hear you say your dad's church, like dad as pastor, or just dad was one of the last names, family church?
Dad was one of the last names, family church.
Okay.
That was his home church. What we call home church.
So being at church, I get it. That's like, I don't want to say the typical Black family, but at church all day on Sundays, you hear that quite a bit. What did you get out of church at a young age at that point?
Nothing. It was routine. It was something that I had to do. That was, you got up, you knew mom was going to wake you up at 7:30 and you need to be ready by 8:45 so you can be at church at 9:15 Sunday school. So I really didn't get anything out of it growing up at a younger age other than those, the routine of going, seeing people that I knew every Sunday, and then of course my favorite part was the antics. That's what I got out of it. I started paying attention to that before I knew there was antics at a young age. The choirs and the certain people and the shouting and the falling out and all those other kind of stuff. So that's what I got out of it.
Thank you, because I was just about to ask you, what kind of antics are you talking about?
It was that. The people that you could, time when they was going to kick their shoe off and shout. It was like, here she go.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. When did you notice that you didn't necessarily fit in the church box, the traditional church box of what everybody else presented? When did you notice that?
I think it was more so when I got into probably high school, when I really started noticing. In middle school, I really, in the younger ages in the middle school, I really didn't notice because it was just the motions and the routine. By the time I got to 14, 15, I started to really notice certain things that, or start paying attention to certain things people would say. The same conversations that I would hear in the barbershops growing up was the same conversation I started hearing coming out of the pulpit and amongst the elders in the church. So I started paying attention to those things, and it was like, yeah, something ain't right. It's something that I don't fit. I don't fit a particular image I think that they want. Granted, it was suddenly aspects of the church that I guess that was not accepted, but it was what it was, like expression kind of music and choir and stuff like that. But other parts, yeah, man, that's when I started noticing.
So be specific. What kind of things were you hearing at church? The message, the thoughts that you were hearing at church, how they were amplified in the barbershops. What message was that? It was
certain young men in the church that obviously were a little bit more feminine, and you would hear people talking about them. I don't know if they said it to their faces, their parents did, or whatever it was, but they would talk about them in their little groups, because everybody knows the Black church is worse than a sorority fraternity. They're the most cliquish, and you got in the church of 150 or 200, you may have 10 different cliques. And people, especially when church was over with, that's when it got messy. When that benediction was given and y'all went outside, that's when it got messy. And so just kind of floating around and talking and listening to people, interacting with people, you hear people that talk about certain people, especially certain young men in the church. And of course I knew that they seemed different to me because they weren't, so they were what I saw on TV, or what the little representation that I saw on TV as what was known as, or maybe could have been a gay man, or somebody who wasn't picturesque, masculine so much. They were more feminine, so they talked about them. And so, I was hearing the same thing in the barbershop, and that correlated or related to the words like, faggots and sissies, that kind of thing. And so I started hearing it in the church, and I knew, whether or not I knew that they were gay, which I pretty much assumed that they were by that age, because what I was dealing with, it was like, dog, they got a real deal problem with these people. For whatever reason, other than the fact that they're not manly or they are gay. That's what it came down to. So with me coming into my own knowing that I was a gay man or a gay adolescent, it was like, I may not exude as much as these guys do, but if I did, I would get the same scrutiny and ridicule that they would. So that's when I was like, yeah, something wrong. And that, because it's a home, is when I started saying other things about church that I didn't like.
Okay.
The whole corporation and institution way it's run, the constant bickering of this constant conversation and asking for this thing of money and all this other kind of stuff. I'm sick of this shit. Y'all talk about more church and y'all talk about more about getting this money than you talk about. It's like the backseat to talking about what you're here to talk about. That's what I thought they were here to talk about. So, yeah, that's when I noticed something was different about me in this environment that I grew up in.
Okay. So up until, I think, just summarize what I think I heard you say. I think I heard you say up until pretty much high school, church had been routine. And from middle school, maybe to early parts of high school, 14, 15, I think that's when you started to come into your sexuality.
When I became more confident in the sense of that I knew that this was part of me.
Okay.
I had those thoughts at a much younger age, but I even had the hindsight and self-awareness to know at that age that, I don't know if this is really, really, really me. But I knew that I continued to have those feelings as it went on. And I knew that was, going to be part of who I was.
And so, as you're growing up, adolescence to teen years, adolescence hearing or feeling certain feelings, not really being able to express those, but what you're hearing and seeing at church is that, if I'm a little different, then folks gonna talk about me at church, and I'm hearing this echoed in the barbershops.
Yeah, and in the home too. In
the home. Okay, thanks for that. And so, this message that comes from church is disseminated into the church, is disseminated into community, to Black community.
Black community, definitely.
So, from you, when you discover sexuality and you start to recognize that, man, I don't really fit into the traditional masculine box of what church says I should be. At what point did you start to become either more vocal about identity, or you begin to hide more of who and what identity was for you?
As far as hiding it, in my social settings, I decided that maybe, I think it was probably eighth grade going into much of high school, trying to date, or, I guess, I was going to say, get to know a female to see, if this is something that I guess give it a shot, give it a test drive, that kind of thing. And that's when I started testing that theory out, and that wasn't right for me. I mean, all of my friends, most of my friends are close girlfriends. They're like my sisters. I've always been in that clique. But having that sexual attraction, I tried to see if that would happen naturally or organically, and it never did. I even had a girlfriend. I had two of them. That shit didn't work. We talk about everything but I guess y'all should talk about it. Yeah. So yeah, it didn't work.
So I'm hearing you say then you found community in females that were accepting.
Yeah.
And so go back to family. Was family echo, as you said, family, some of them echo a message from church. So how did family interaction with you, how would that impact on you? How did that impact your life? I'm sorry.
In regards to
just your sexuality, were they open to it, or were they following the message from church?
I think they were in the forefront. In hindsight, they were probably following the church, and it was more so like the military, like a don't ask, don't tell. You know, I didn't bring up me wanting to date or be with guys, and nor did they really ask me about it. It wasn't like, my brother, Gary, date some little girl that, work in the movie theater, that kind of stuff. And they would talk about those kind of things, but there was never talk about me other than my dad. He would bring up and he always wanted me to date and be my best friend. That's the only thing that's what he would talk about. So other than that conversation, that was it. So it didn't necessarily make me, I guess, hide it, but I'm not a person that likes confrontation. So if it wasn't going to be a topic of conversation, I didn't have to explain myself, I just didn't. I didn't. I felt that I'm a firm believer in, I feel bad kind of saying that because I don't want to get the wrong message, especially young kids or young adolescents that's dealing with this. I knew what the expectation was in my mom and dad's house. So it was like I knew that I was going to be low key or do my dirt as much as I could be low key until I got that glorious emancipation and went off to college. I knew that's when I would be able to do those things because I was no longer under their roof. Because it's their roof, their rules. And I respected that to a sense. For me, as long as they didn't come at me negatively and just really try to make me feel bad, it wasn't going to bother me too much. I had some run-ins with my dad growing up, though. Some real traumatizing experience about things that he would say to me as a much younger kid. Not so much as I got older. I don't know if it's because he was absent so much or maybe he just knew that I was a little off. I was the one that told him I beat your ass. That was me to my dad. I love him dearly, but I just, you're not gonna make me feel unsafe. I'm gonna defend myself. So I don't know if he just stopped doing it because of that or because he was absent, but nobody else ever just really, before I left my mom and dad, nobody just really confronted me about it. The only time that I would really feel somewhat uncomfortable is when I would go to a barbershop or when I was at church and I would hear these things. But in the home, I guess I was blessed in a sense because it was blissfully avoided by both parents. Siblings would really ask me about it. I think really because they just either didn't care or they just didn't notice. But yeah, my parents, they didn't give me too much of a hard time other than my dad when I was much younger. I'm talking about 7, 8 years old, that kind of thing. But by the time I got to high school, I had just immersed myself in work, and I was at school and I was at work. I had a part-time job in the movie theater. That was my solace. That was my peace. Okay. I stayed at work as much as I possibly could.
Wow. So I'm seeing the trend. I heard you say that as long as I was at my folks' house, I followed their rules because I knew what it was with them. Yeah. And I also hearing you say it was like that for you at church. This was the expectation of what it was at church. And so, hey, I respected what there was, but in these two spaces, I wasn't really allowed to be my authentic self.
Yeah, I wasn't.
And it was only outside of those two spaces with your friends and at work that you found community.
Yeah.
And so 3 words that are buzzing with me right now. Identity, community, purpose. And I'm not certain which order those things would go in, but when a person discovers themselves, their identity, and I want to live out loud. I want to be me. I want to be free to be me. And when I don't have the space to do that, that can be problematic. And so I'm hearing in two major spaces of your life, you had to mask up.
Yeah.
You said dad said some traumatic things to you.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of stuff was dad sharing?
Sissy and punks and threatening to take me to the stores to buy dresses and make me carry a purse through, Walmart and up and down the street and that kind of stuff. Basically, if you want to be a woman so bad, let's make that happen because I'm going to shame you. I'm gonna make you in hopes feel so badly about this decision that you think that you want to make that you will not want to pursue it any further. That shame thing. So yeah, I mean it worked in a sense because at a younger age I was always enamored by music and movies. Old Hollywood glamour to the girl groups and Diana Ross with Frankie Whitney Houston, all those the big divas. I was just in love with them, and I like watching them so much that I almost wanted to, I guess, emulate them to a certain extent, but also at the same time knowing that I was a guy or I was a boy and that this wasn't going to be right. So, I would do certain things. I would, sneak and get a piece of jewelry from mama or, do something silly like put a t-shirt on my head and think it was some long hair. That kind of stuff and playing, and being a kid. And when my dad caught me, like, it was ugly. It was very, very, very ugly. I didn't have another experience with that until I was probably around 7 or 8. I didn't have another experience until I was probably about 11 or 12 with him. He found some pictures that I had under my mattress, and that was a big, I laugh about that, but it was a big ordeal. It was really big. Just shaming a person, And I don't know if that was his way of trying to protect me from the world because he knew of the world where I didn't. So I don't know if he was doing his way of parenting, his best way to know how, or was he really trying to be malicious? I don't know, and I will never know, because those were conversations I'd never be able to have with my dad. But I know that it affected me a certain type of way, and it made me, shift gears and maybe make me more aware of what I could do and what I couldn't do. I wasn't a very perceptive individual even as a kid, so I know how to read a room, and I knew how to do it then. So, I say, yeah, you said mask up. I think, yeah, definitely would mask up, but it was more so, I kind of keep my head down until I knew that I was in a position to where I could have more independence. Mm-hmm. And that's where I coasted until I got out of my mom and dad's house, unless I was at work.
Let me ask you something. Keeping in line with learning how to read a room and perceiving people, their comfort level with you in this room, do I have to be a chameleon? Do I have to mask up? How did that go with you into adulthood?
Always made me just aware. I always had my senses really high. My spidey senses has always been how I walk into a room. When I was younger. So, something as simple as interacting with my brothers. And my brothers, I've always been for a long time, I was known as Gabe's little brother. My brother was a sports guy and, girls loved him and he had all the friends, popular friends stuff in school and that kind of stuff. So coming up right behind him, it was always like little Gabe and, I would be around his friends and stuff like that. So I guess I would mask up and be aware of that room and know that it was certain things that I could do that they couldn't do. Something as simple as, we could be out. We used to drive on permits. No, we weren't supposed to. Mama trusted us to go up to the movie theater up the street, and she let us drive the car, and it was like, that's where y'all supposed to be, and that's it, come straight home. But our asses, we out there either downtown, flicking downtown in these cars, or we would be at the Majestic. Anybody who's in Memphis knows that the Majestic movie theater at a certain time was a hot spot. It was like Palisades. It was the place to show out your car at the Majestic Theater in Memphis. All Winchester Theater. But I said that to say they would be out there and they would be in their cars and parking and girls would be coming by and walking by and talking and laughing and flirting and all that kind of stuff. So for me, it was like, yeah, I was there in the moment and I would, speak to a young lady and all that kind of stuff. But the same way they would holler at those women, I would be envious because it was like, I saw a dude walking there and I was like, yeah, he's fine. But I couldn't say this shit. In fear of, what could possibly be said or whatever consequences were. So, yeah, I had to mask up and be, adapt to the environment and suppress what my desires were. I did that when I was with them. Then when I got out, even when I got into college, I had a sense of freedom, but at the same time, it was still just societal kind of things because I still hadn't, even though my closest girlfriends knew in their heart of hearts, I had yet to come out to them because I didn't come out to two of my closest friends until I was like 19, And all of them gave me the same response. Well, yeah, we was waiting on you to tell them. But at the same time, I felt that I had to mask certain parts. I couldn't talk about the guys that I was seeing or even something like an escapade. They talk about the dude they met at the burrito shop and they came back to the dorm room. I can talk about the niggas that I met and brought back to my dorm room because it was like I didn't want them to know that part of me. But once I started to come out, that's when my senses, they were still on alert, but they were on alert for different reasons. I was no longer in fear. It was more so, do I want to fight this battle today? Still just like something like going back to the barbershop. Granted, I came out to all my friends and some of my family, but in the barbershop, it was still very much, I came in there, everybody interacting and laughing and jumping all that shit. I came and get my haircut, ask me, do the little and get the fuck out of there. I didn't, dwell. Because I couldn't talk about the things that they talk about. I didn't watch sports. I didn't give a fuck about no sports. I played football, but that's because my dad made me. So I didn't have a connection with them, a common with sports. I didn't have a connection with the womanizer thing because I ain't no females like fuck about y'all bitches. So yeah, my senses were on alert, but I chose not to fight that battle, have to do that battle. And the same thing in church. I'm sure people knew, and I never been extremely flamboyant, so I don't think it ever been like a real, okay. But at the same time, they would always ask, yeah, so when you go, are you and your friend, y'all dating yet? And how old women in church be and that kind of stuff. But I just chose not to worry about it.
So I can only imagine how traumatizing at 7, 11, just as a child, hearing those things from your dad. Did you receive any other people in your family that were not as accepting of you or who you had to be around other family members? Were there any other spaces in your life where you had to do that with family?
Yeah, uncles and my grandmothers, both of them actually. People that you be around you love so much. I had a great relationship with with all of my uncles, specifically the uncles that was on my mother's side, because now I see it as they knew that my dad was absent during those times. So they always made it a point to come pick us up, spend the weekend, take us somewhere on the weekend, or that kind of stuff. So very, very close relationship with those men, and then having a close relationship with my grandmothers because they were, grandmoms, very, very much involved in our lives. But, you would hear them just like I always said growing up, you get something about homosexuals and stuff like that. It was like, they're going straight to hell. That's wrong, it's not right, that's not natural, and that kind of stuff. So you hear those things and then you start to get you start to fear because even at a young age that I'm looking at young men the way society is saying that I should be looking at young women. But because now I hear them saying that that's so wrong, hey, I'm just gonna kind of fly under the radar. So yeah, that's hurtful. That's hurtful for anybody, because you don't feel comfortable and you're around people that you love so much, but you feel like it's not fair. Like why is what I'm feeling so wrong and why is it so unnatural? And am I going to hell? This hell that I've heard so much about growing up as a kid, am I going there because I have these feelings? So yeah, it'll fuck you up.
Let me ask you something. What's your relationship with church now? Because it seems like that message still is permeated throughout I don't want to say black church, but it's still the message of church. What's your relationship with church now?
I don't have one. You know, I wasn't going to church pre-pandemic. So when the pandemic hit, it was even more like, no, I ain't going there. And I just recently did an event in church. I was very much involved in church for a long time, especially with the youth and different events and stuff like that in church. I always loved doing that. But I just recently did an event the first thing I've done at church in I don't know how long. We did trunk treat for the kids this past Halloween. So that was the first thing I've done. So my relationship now is like non-existent. I don't even think about it. And it's not just my home church, it's just about church as a whole. They become, I know that, they got bills to pay and all that kind of stuff, but it's too much business for me. Business coupled with, messiness and opinions and people talking about how social media and this platform is always, it's this thing and blah, blah, blah. It's been around for years. People with comments and shit, that's life. That's especially the church. If you was in the church house and somebody said something, it'd be like a post on Facebook, you see all these comments popping up in the church. It's toxic as hell to be in church. It really, really is. And because people have so many, I'm guilty of having opinions about certain things in the church myself, but the things that I would say in the church, I would say those opinions to people that I know don't repeat things, But some people just say it out loud and they don't care who hears it and, that kind of thing. And that's scary.
What do you think about the influence that the church has on the black community? As you alluded to this earlier, you said the message came from church, it impacted your home, it impacted community barbershop. What do you think the influence, what does the black church, what level of influence does it have on just black culture?
Great influence. You think about it, it's anybody that for the most part, has a background in church. That's been their foundation. Whether they subscribe to it now, they had that foundation in church. They grew up in church. So it has a big influence because it's embedded. And it's as far back as, slavery. That was the foundation. Church was a place where blacks could come together, commune, and just have some sense of community. It was a place of, it was a safe haven for them then. And it's now just been built up to this huge, the church got a lot of influence. You got churches that back political figures and all. They say separate the church, that's bullshit. They got their pockets and their hands and everything. You got people that's got multi-million-dollar churches and got hundreds of people on payroll and all this kind of stuff. That's influence. When you have money, you have influence. And from the very beginning, it had a big say in communities, especially in the black communities. They live by the word. Whatever the book says, that's what the book says. But from the very beginning, ain't nobody ever practiced what was in that book to 100%. We always pick and choose what we want to celebrate and what we want to build by in the Bible. And it's the way it is now. And it's very strong. Very, very, very strong to this day.
So I heard you echo again. It's like we keep amplifying community. The church starting out initially, it was a community for slaves. It was a space where slaves had identity, had a bond, a common bond, and whatever the purpose of church back then, it was the place to escape mentally, socially, and so you had this space that cultivated acceptance. Somewhere down the line, we started to make people fit in the box.
Yeah.
And so whatever this church box is, this is how you're supposed to be, real button up, just dressed this way.
Mm-hmm.
It changed with different people got in power.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I think you should look like. This is what you should do. These different denominations and practices that echoed and spread throughout the community. I'm hearing you say, and
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing to spread to the community, and I have to be guarded in the community.
Mm-hmm.
But when that message comes to my home, and my parents are, that's a tough space to be in, man.
Yeah, it is, because you can't escape it.
Yeah.
For me, it was, I didn't bring it up, so it wasn't as bad as I know friends and acquaintances that I have now that it was bad for them. So yeah, man, it's sad. It's really, it's heartbreaking for some of the stories that I hear from people, both men and women, especially in the LGBT community, just because of what they were told is right and wrong. Half of them don't even know where to find this right and wrong in the Bible. They just know that there was a person in a pulpit that preached to them as a kid that this is wrong and that you're going to have. Therefore, that's just what they go off of. And that sense of thing is taught. It's no different than racism. And I know that I've said this to people before, and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, no, it's taught. You're not born into this world hating somebody because of the color of their skin. That you're taught that. And the same thing is, you're not born in this world knowing that, oh well, you're not born in the world knowing that a man and a woman should be together, much less that a man and a woman should be together. These are things that you're taught that are right and what's wrong. So yeah, it's taught. And it's there in church. It starts in the church, especially in the Black community. And the only reason I know that is because I've been in it for so long. It's taught in the church. I've heard it.
So as an adult now, living your authentic life, do you still struggle to be your authentic self in all spaces? Do you still feel like you have to mask up?
I will think about it. I'll think about it before I'll think about it before I do it, but not really anymore. I think I'm always going to have this hesitation over me because of how I was brought up, and then also because of me being a Black man living in America, in the South. Those things, it's always going to make you a little bit more aware of it. Now, will it completely stop me from being my business? No, not at this point. I was thinking, some weeks ago about, we lucky we get 70 years. I will be 35 in February. That's half that 70 years. I'm thinking about my mortality. So at this point, it's like, I really don't care what this person thinks about me or what this person thinks, if they think more of me or less of me. That's not my concern right now. My concern right now is me just finding some happiness and some bliss in this little time that I have here left on this earth. That's what I'm concerned about. The rest of it, no, I don't care. And I know that I can be weak, so, I'm not even on social media. Like, I'm not even on Facebook right now. Not because it's something negative said about me. I'm just sick of people with all their opinions in their comments. I'm sick of seeing that, I have my opinion on the subject if I hear about world news, and that's all that matters to me. I don't care what Karen or Donald thinks, 3 states away about a subject. It doesn't matter to me. Your opinion does not matter.
So we'll wrap here, but seeing how we are in the Bible Belt in the South, does, as a preacher would say, or an old mother would say, well, aren't you worried or concerned about where you're going to spend eternity and this lifestyle? What is it? Where it's going to send you? Is that something that you even have thought about now?
No one's concerned with what they should be worried about, where they're going to spend eternity. Everybody has something that they are not living truthfully by this book. And if you're going to go by what's in this book that's going to determine whether you go to heaven or hell, everybody's in trouble. You preach that no sin is greater than other. Therefore, you an adulterer in your past life, but I'm homosexual in my current life. You good. but I'm going to hell. Shut your ass up. Preacher, mother, all y'all go to hell. Because you full of shit, you're a hypocrite. Mm-hmm. I'm not concerned, but don't worry about my eternal soul. I'm fine. I know my faith. I know I believe that I'm fine, that I'm going to be okay. Just be concerned about yours.
It's interesting as we wrap here, but it's interesting that so much is said from church about homosexuality, LGBTQ community, but nowhere in the Bible does Jesus speak about homosexuality.
We can talk about that Bible for a long time. I got many people on that Bible. All I'm going to say is man wrote that Bible. Boom. That's it.
It's interesting that, if you're going by the book, the Bible, that Jesus never discloses that as if sexuality didn't exist. Of course it existed back then, but, if anything, he said, hey, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And that's the greatest commandment. So, man, I appreciate you being in the hot seat. I would love to get you back because I want to do a part 2 of this because I want to see the perspective from someone that's in church that has that ideology, that mindset, and they're still preaching or teaching that message. I want to get like some discourse, and I'd love to get you back on that on the show for that.
Absolutely.
Until then, here's On the Couch with Tim. Marlon, I appreciate you. Thank you guys. We out.